The painful weed that turns into soup. Why we were taught to fear nettle. Most people think stinging nettle has only one job: to hurt you. You brush it once, you feel fire on your skin, and you learn a rule you never forget: don't touch that plant. But what if that pain was the best marketing the modern world ever got for ignoring a free food? What if the plant that stings you is also the plant people once cooked into soup, brewed into tea, and used when medicine was scarce? And here is the uncomfortable question. If nettle is useful and it grows almost everywhere, why did it vanish from the everyday American plate? Who benefits when you fear it? Stinging nettle is called Urtica dioica. It grows across North America and much of the northern hemisphere. It shows up in places you already know, along fences, near creeks, at the edge of yards, and it comes armed. The sting is not a metaphor. The leaves and stems are covered with tiny, brittle hairs. Botanists call them trichomes. They act like little needles. When you touch them, their tips break and deliver irritating chemicals that trigger burning and itching. So the plant earns a reputation: dangerous, dirty, a weed. Across northern and eastern Europe, and in parts of the Middle East, people have long treated nettle as a spring vegetable. There is even a simple name for it: nettle soup. In many places it appears early in the year when gardens are still bare and fresh greens are rare, and the moment the nettle is cooked, the sting stops being the headline. So here is the story we are opening today. How did a plant that once fed people become a plant we fear? And why, in the age of expensive supplements and rising grocery bills, are so many of us still walking past it without seeing it? To understand that, we have to start with a truth that feels backwards. The sting is not the point. The sting is the lock, and the key is heat. Across cultures, the basic trick is the same. Harvest young tops in spring, wear gloves, then blanch, boil, or dry them. A short dip in boiling water is enough. After that, nettle can be handled like spinach. It can be chopped, sautéed, blended, and eaten. That simple fact changes the entire meaning of the plant, because now the sting looks less like poison and more like protection. A defense that kept animals from eating it down to the ground. A defense that also kept humans from casually wiping it out. And that brings us to our first turning point. If you go back far enough, nettle is not a modern fad. It is old, very old. Traditional records describe nettle as a plant used for food and for folk remedies in many places. The 1st and 2nd century Greek physicians Dioscorides and Galen both wrote about nettle in the ancient medical tradition. Centuries later, in northern Europe, nettle appears again and again as a practical plant. It was food when fresh greens were scarce. It was a tea when people wanted something simple. It was a rub on sore joints in folk practice. And there is an even stranger chapter. It is a practice called urtication. People deliberately applied nettles to the skin to provoke redness and warmth. Some sources even describe Roman troops using nettles in cold climates, stinging themselves on purpose to feel heat and stay alert. That sounds extreme today, but it shows you something important. For most of history, people were not deciding between nettle and 100 products in a pharmacy aisle. They were deciding between what grows nearby and going without. Now hold that thought, because the story is about to flip. In the modern world, nettle becomes a symbol of the opposite. Not survival, not food, just a nuisance. And this is where the fear gets built. The fear is practical at first. Kids get stung, gardeners get stung, homeowners see it near where the dog runs, near where the grandkids play, and they do what homeowners do. They remove it. But fear spreads faster than facts, because nettle is dramatic. It teaches a lesson instantly. Touch equals pain. Pain equals danger. And danger equals kill it. So nettle gets filed into the same mental folder as poison ivy. Even though the mechanism is different, even though the solution is simple, and even though many people around the world keep eating it. Here is the second turning point. Nettle is not only a food story, it also becomes a product story. Modern herbal use often talks about nettle in three different forms: leaf, root, and extracts. In the late 20th century, nettle drew attention for allergies. In one randomized, double-blind study published in the year 1990, participants with allergic rhinitis took a freeze-dried nettle preparation, or a placebo. The nettle group rated the results higher in global assessments, while symptom diaries showed only a small difference. That is not a miracle, but it is not nothing either. Decades later, other trials continued exploring nettle in allergy settings. For example, a randomized, double-blind study in Iran looked at nettle as supportive therapy for allergic rhinitis. The point is not that nettle cures allergies. Rather, researchers kept asking the question. And the question itself is a hook. Why would a plant that makes you itch be studied for allergy symptoms? Why would something that feels like histamine on your skin be discussed as potentially affecting inflammatory pathways? This is the "wait what" moment of the nettle story. The plant is a contradiction, and now it gets even more complicated. Nettle root has also been studied for urinary symptoms linked to benign prostatic hyperplasia, known as BPH. A comprehensive review in the 2000s examined pharmacological and clinical effects. It noted that only some components of the active principle are identified and that the mechanisms are not fully clear. In plain English, that means this: people use it. Some studies suggest benefit, but the science is still sorting out exactly what is doing what and for whom. That is the honest version. And the honest version is more interesting than a sales pitch. It forces a new question. If the evidence is mixed, why does nettle still hold a place in tradition and in research? And that brings us to the part most videos skip. The part that is not about benefits. The part about why you were trained to fear it. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Modern life rewards convenience, and nettle is not convenient. Nettle does not come in a neat plastic box with a barcode. It does not fit the idea of a perfect lawn. It stings, which creates liability. It requires knowledge, identification, careful handling, and cooking. For many people, especially in suburban America, there is also a deeper cultural signal. If food comes from the store, then anything that grows wild is not food. It is called weeds. It is what poor people ate. It is what you would only touch in a survival situation. But history says the opposite. Wild greens were not a weird hobby. They were normal. So what changed? Part of it is social. As we moved away from seasonal living, we stopped needing the first greens of spring. Part of it is economic. We built food systems around crops that ship, store, and look consistent under fluorescent lights. Part of it is personal safety. People worry about contamination near roads, about pesticides, about misidentification, about medical interactions. And part of it is the simplest reason of all. The sting makes the lesson easy. If a plant stings, you do not need a lecture to avoid it. You avoid it forever. That single sensation does what 1,000 warnings cannot. It turns knowledge into instinct. Now let us zoom in on the sting again, because this is where the story becomes visual. Each stinging hair is like a tiny glass syringe. Brooklyn Botanic Garden describes these hairs as needle-like trichomes that can release irritating compounds such as histamine, acetylcholine, serotonin, and formic acid. You touch, the tip breaks, and the chemicals meet your skin. That is why nettle feels like it does. That is why people fear it. But in the kitchen, the sting becomes a plot twist. Heat neutralizes the sting. Drying also reduces it. And once the sting is gone, what you have is a leafy green with a long culinary tradition. So here is the moment where the story needs to get practical. Our audience is not looking for a fantasy. They want reality. They want a reason to care. If you are over 50, you have likely watched three things change. Food got more expensive. Allergy season got worse for a lot of people. and the supplement aisle got bigger. Nettle sits at the intersection of those trends, not as a miracle cure, but as a reminder. Some of the things we pay for now used to be knowledge, and that brings us to an even more outrageous moment. Nettle is not just leaf and soup, it is also fiber. Nettle stems contain bast fiber, similar in concept to flax. Historically, nettle textiles have been found in Bronze Age contexts in Europe. Today, some companies are experimenting again with nettle fiber, partly because nettle can grow without heavy pesticide use. So the plant you learned to avoid was once a food, a folk remedy, and a material, a multi-tool, a survival plant, and now it is mostly a punchline. That is the loss, not the loss of a single recipe, the loss of a relationship with the landscape. But we still need to answer the big promise from the beginning. Why were we taught to fear it? The answer is not one villain. It is a system of tiny incentives. A stinging plant is hard to sell fresh. It bruises, it hurts to harvest. It scares customers. It creates risk for stores and restaurants, so it stays niche. And when something stays niche, it becomes invisible. Invisible means unfamiliar. Unfamiliar means scary. And scary means you never learn the simple part, which is how to make it safe, so the fear keeps paying rent. Now, let's bring this story down to earth, to a single bowl of soup. Imagine early spring. You want something green, but your garden is not ready. You see nettle pushing up anyway. It is there before many cultivated greens. It does not ask permission. In places where nettle soup is a tradition, that timing matters. It is the first taste of the new season, and that leads to the most human part of the story. Nettle did not vanish because it stopped being useful. It faded because modern life made it unnecessary, and the sting made it easy to forget. But the plant never left. It is still along that fence, still in that ditch, still behind that shed, still waiting for someone who knows what it is. Now, I want to be careful here, because this matters. If you are on blood thinners, diabetes medications, or you have kidney concerns, do not treat nettle like a toy. Many mainstream references warn about possible interactions and side effects, and supplements are not regulated like prescription drugs. So if you're thinking about nettle as a supplement, talk to a professional you trust. But as a food, prepared correctly, nettle has one clear advantage. It takes something you were taught to fear and turns it into something you can use, and that is the real payoff. This is not a claim that nettle fixes everything. This is not a promise that you will never sneeze again. The payoff is simpler and honestly more powerful. You regain choice. You look at the landscape and see options, not threats. You see that some warnings are about pain, not poison. You learn that a plant can protect itself without being your enemy. So let's close the loop. The plant that hurts you on contact was never designed to be friendly. It was designed to survive. And in surviving, it accidentally hid something useful from the modern world. A seasonal green, a traditional soup, a complicated herb that science keeps trying to understand, a fiber that history keeps rediscovering. The sting was the warning label, but it was also the lock. And once you understand the lock, you start noticing how many other weeds are really just forgotten tools. If you found this fascinating, subscribe for more stories like this, because the next time you feel that sharp burn on your skin, you might stop and ask a different question. What else did we learn to fear that we could have learned to use?